My Amish neighbor Daniel spends about $2 a season on pest control. For 30 years, I spent closer to 200. I had 7 dust under the kitchen sink and a sprayer in the shed, and every August my garden was still a war zone. Daniel's garden, a quarter mile away, never was. Here's the thing, the pesticide industry spent decades hoping you'd forget. The Amish never needed chemicals because they solved pests a different way. Cheap, simple, and almost wiped out of American gardening after the 1950s. Stick with me because at the end I'll show you the one thing Daniel does the first week of May that sets the whole defense in motion before a single pest ever shows up. So let me tell you who buried it, because this wasn't an accident. After the Second World War, the synthetic pesticide industry had factories built for wartime chemistry and nothing to make. DDT got turned loose on the home market and it spread fast. The year was 1947 when Congress passed FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and chemical pest control became the official government-blessed way to grow food in America. Here's where it really hurt the home gardener. The Agricultural Extension Service, the folks who write the bulletins your county hands out, quietly rewrote their advice through the 1950s. The old bulletins used to talk about interplanting, about which flowers to tuck among your vegetables, about feeding the good insects. All of that got dropped. In its place came the chemical spray schedule. Spray this week, spray again in 10 days. The companion planting wisdom that had worked for generations got filed away as backward folklore, unscientific, old-timey, and the cost landed right in your lap. Gardeners who used to spend a couple dollars a season on seed were suddenly spending well over $100 a year on chemicals. They traded clean produce for repeated chemical exposure. And worst of all, they got locked onto what I call the treadmill. Spray, knock the bugs back, watch them come roaring back worse, spray again. I lived that treadmill for about 30 years. 7 dust under the kitchen sink, a sprayer in the shed. I did exactly what the bulletins told me to do. Now here's the part that matters. My Amish neighbor Daniel never got those rewritten bulletins. His old order community here in Lancaster County sat outside that whole pipeline, outside the commercial advertising, outside the extension service. Nobody came to Daniel's farm telling him to throw out the old ways and buy a bag of poison. So he kept the method everyone else was told to abandon. 50 years, same plot, same approach his father used. And his garden, a quarter mile from mine, was never a war zone. So one evening, late in that disaster summer of 2003, I walked over with a 6-pack of root beer and asked him straight out what I was doing wrong. And Daniel told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "You're not doing anything wrong, Bill. You're just fighting the wrong war." Then he showed me the secret. And I'll be honest with you, when I saw what it actually was, I almost laughed because it cost about $2. Here's the thing, the whole defense, the thing the pesticide industry hoped you'd forget, comes down to a handful of seed packets. Marigolds, the French kind, the tagetes, dill, nasturtiums, calendula, basil, sweet alyssum, that's it, that's the $2. A couple packets of flower and herb seed tucked in among the vegetables instead of off in some separate flower bed. The Amish call it nothing fancy. They just plant that way, the way their grandparents planted, because it works. Daniel's been doing it for 50 years on the same plot. His father did it before him. Now I want to be straight with you about how strange this felt at first. The next spring, and this was 2004, I went out and interplanted marigolds and dill right between my tomato plants, right in the vegetable rows, and my wife came out, looked at what I'd done, and told me I'd lost my mind. That's a flower garden, Bill, not a food garden. I didn't have a good answer for her. I was just copying Daniel. I trusted him more than I trusted my own 30 years of doing it the chemical way. So I left the flowers in. By August, she understood. The tomatoes were the cleanest I'd grown in years. The hornworms that used to strip my plants bare just weren't the problem they'd always been. And she said it herself, standing there in the garden. Those flowers weren't decoration. They were security. That's the moment it clicked for both of us. And here's the part that ought to make you a little angry. You will not find this in a single one of those rewritten extension bulletins from the 50s. Why would you? Nobody can sell you a marigold twice. The seed self-sows. The system pays for itself. There's no repeat customer in a flower that comes back on its own. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the obvious question is the one I asked Daniel that first year. How does a marigold stop a hornworm? It's not poison. It doesn't spray anything. So what's actually happening out there? And the answer is that the system works 3 different ways at once, and once you see all 3, you can't unsee it. The first way is scent. Most American gardeners would never figure this out because they're not paying attention to how a pest actually finds your plants. A pest doesn't see your tomato the way you do. it smells it. A hornworm moth, an aphid, a flea beetle. They track the scent of the host plant on the wind, and they follow that scent right to dinner. Now plant a strong aromatic herb in the middle of all that. Basil, dill. Their oils flood the air with a completely different smell, and suddenly the pest can't read the map anymore. The tomato scent it was tracking gets buried under a wall of basil. Daniel put it to me plain one afternoon. He said, never let a pest find its dinner where it expects it. That's the whole idea. You're not killing anything. You're just hiding the table. The bug flies over your garden and can't tell where the meal is. I tested this on my own beds for years before I fully believed it. I'd plant basil thick around the tomatoes one season and leave it sparse the next just to see. Every single time the basil heavy beds took less damage, not zero, but far less. And it cost me a packet of basil seed I'd have planted for the kitchen anyway. That's the kind of thing that makes you stop and wonder how much money you've handed over for problems a seed packet would have solved. The second way the system works is something called trap cropping, and this one is almost mischievous when you understand it. Instead of hiding the dinner table, you set out a second table the pests like even better, and you let them have it. Nasturtiums are the classic. Aphids love nasturtiums more than they love your brassicas or your beans. So you ring your cabbage and your bush beans with nasturtium, and the aphids pile onto the nasturtium instead. They march right past the food you actually want and settle on the sacrifice plant. Same trick with radishes around squash. Flea beetles and cucumber beetles will hammer a radish leaf and leave the squash alone. You plant the radish as bait. You're not even trying to harvest it. Now think about what that means against the way I used to garden. My instinct, the instinct those bulletins trained into me, was to kill every bug I saw, everywhere, all the time. Daniel's approach was the opposite. He'd look at a nasturtium crawling with aphids and smile, because that meant the aphids were on the nasturtium and not on his greens. He wasn't fighting them. He was steering them, sending them to a spot where they couldn't do any harm, and, as I'd learn later, on a spot where something else was waiting to eat them. That's the part the spray schedule never had room for. A spray schedule is a calendar of poison. Day 1, spray this. Day 14, spray that. It treats your garden like a factory floor that needs the same chemical dose on the same date every year. There's no room in that thinking for hiding a plant by scent or for setting a trap a pest can't resist. Those things take attention. They take watching. They can't be standardized, packaged, and printed on the side of a bag. So when the industry rewrote America's garden advice after the war, the scent trick and the trap crop just quietly disappeared from the page. Not because they stopped working. They never stopped working. Daniel's garden is the living proof, a quarter-mile from my back door, doing the same thing it's done for half a century. But scent and trap cropping are only the first 2 layers. The third one is the one that took me the longest to understand, and it's the one that turns your garden from a place that hides food into a place that actively hunts the pests for you. That third layer is what Daniel calls the welcome mat. He doesn't just hide his vegetables and set traps for the pests. He plants a standing invitation for the insects that eat the pests. Sweet alyssum, dill, calendula, yarrow, fennel, little flowers with tiny landing pads tucked along the bed ends and through the rows. Those flowers feed the lacewings, the ladybugs, the hoverflies, and the tiny parasitic wasps that do the killing for you. Daniel never sprayed an aphid in his life. He just made sure the things that eat aphids had a reason to live in his garden and raise their young there. His rule is the same one he gave me for the traps. Never let a pest find its dinner where it expects it. Put a predator on every corner and the dinner gets eaten before the pest finishes sitting down. I remember the morning I understood it. Spring of 2005, second year on Daniel's method, I was doing my rounds with a cup of coffee and I spotted a lacewing on a tomato leaf, a little green thing with lace wings just sitting there. I almost called my wife over, not because of one insect, but because it meant the system was working. Something invisible had shifted, and that tiny green creature was the proof. I hadn't bought it. I hadn't released it. The alyssum and the dill had called it in. You will not read that in a spray schedule bulletin because there's no product to sell when the garden does its own hunting. Nobody can package a lacewing and put it on a shelf with a price tag. Now here's where the dollars come in, and I want to be straight with you about both numbers. Daniel spends about $2 a season because that's roughly what a packet or 2 of seed costs when he needs to top something up. Marigold, dill, nasturtium, calendula, alyssum, basil. Most years he barely buys anything because the flowers self-seed and come back on their own. The system pays for itself. My old way ran closer to $200 a season, and I can account for every penny. 7 dust under the sink, a bottle of neem, a new sprayer when the old one clogged, and then the refills year after year because the problem never actually went away. That's the difference between buying a seed once plants and renting a chemical forever. And the pairings are simple. Daniel grows his tomatoes with basil and marigold right in the bed with carrots threaded between. His brassicas, or the cabbage and broccoli and kale, go in with dill and nasturtium and chamomile. His squash gets nasturtium and a scattering of radish along the edge. Every one of those flowers and herbs is doing a job. Some hide the crop by scent, some pull the pest away onto themselves, some feed the predators. It looks like a flower garden. My wife said exactly that the first year back in 2004 when I tucked marigolds and dill among the tomatoes. She told me I'd lost my mind, that I'd planted a flower garden, not a food garden. By August, she understood. The flowers weren't decoration, they were security, but underneath all of it is the part that took me the longest to accept, and it's the foundation Daniel always comes back to. He told me once, plain as anything, I don't protect my plants, my soil protects my plants. A strong plant grown in living soil full of compost makes its own defenses. It's denser, it's tougher, and the pests pass it over for the weak one next door. I'd spent 30 years treating the symptom with a sprayer. Daniel treated the cause with a compost pile. After 2 decades of compost on my own beds, I finally have soil that does what his does. It grows plants, the bugs don't bother, and that's the thing the industry could never sell because nobody makes a profit telling you the answer was in your dirt the whole time. Now, the fourth layer is the one that sounds wrong the first time you hear it, and it's the one that separates the people who get this from the people who don't. You have to let some pests live, a baseline, a small population on purpose, because if you kill every last aphid, you starve the ladybugs and the lacewings that were keeping them in check, and they leave, then one pest slips back in over the fence and there's nothing waiting for it. That's why a chemically clean garden collapses the moment a single bug returns. Daniel's garden is never spotless. There are always a few aphids on a leaf somewhere, keeping his army fed and breeding. A spotless garden is a defenseless garden. That is the exact opposite of everything I was taught, and it's exactly why this never made it into the bulletins. You cannot sell a man a product whose whole point is to do less. Now, if what I'm walking you through here is making sense, which flower goes next to which crop and why, I'll tell you that the pairings are the part most gardeners get wrong, and getting them right is the whole game. I laid all of it out crop by crop in my book, The 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. Chapter 3 is the complete companion planting guide on what to put next to your tomatoes, your brassicas, your squash, your onions, and the reason behind every single pairing Daniel uses. It's $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on the screen. Take your time finding it. I'll be right here. And if you're on your phone or your laptop already, the link is right down in the description. This is for the folks who are tired of fighting the same pests every single season and want a real system instead of one more tip. So that's the method, a couple dollars of seed doing the work of $200 of chemicals, which brings us back to the question in the title. If it's this cheap and it's this simple and it's been sitting in plain sight on Amish farms the whole time, why did it disappear from American gardening? Follow the money, and the answer is uncomfortable. The home and agricultural pesticide market is worth billions of dollars, and it runs on one thing: repeat purchases. A marigold can't be patented. You can't brand a lacewing. You can't sell a man a packet of dill seed every 2 weeks for the rest of his life. Companion planting and beneficial habitat make a one-time buyer out of you. Chemicals make a customer for life. From a seller's chair, that's not a small difference. That's the whole business. And the treadmill isn't a flaw in the product. It's the feature. A broad-spectrum spray kills the pest, sure, but it also kills the ladybugs and the lacewings and the parasitic wasps along with it. So the next outbreak comes back harder with nothing left to hold it down, and now you need more product. The very thing you bought to solve the problem is what guarantees the problem comes back. I lived that for 30 years and never once saw the trap I was in. That's the part that still gets me. When the Extension Service rewrote the home garden advice in the 1950s, the companion methods couldn't be turned into a tidy spray schedule on the side of a bag, so they were dropped as folklore, not disproven, just unsellable. Now, I'll give the other side its due because Daniel taught me to be honest even when it cost me. The chemicals genuinely did something. They let commercial agriculture scale up to feed a growing country, and a single farmer could suddenly manage acreage that used to take a whole community. Companion planting is hard to standardize across 10,000 acres. It asks for attention, for watching, for a human being walking the rows. That doesn't shrink down to an industrial spray rig very well. I understand why the industry went the way it went, but here's what it cost you and me in the backyard where none of that scale ever applied. Decades of money, repeated chemical exposure on the food we fed our own families, and an August war zone every single year, fighting a problem that a couple of seed packets would have quietly prevented. The Amish stayed cheap and pest-free for one simple reason. They were never the industry's customer in the first place, which brings me to the thing I promised you at the start. The one move Daniel makes the first week of May that sets the whole defense in motion before a single pest ever shows up. Here's the thing. Most of what I've described so far is about which plant goes next to which. But Daniel taught me that the secret isn't just the planting, it's the timing. And the timing is the part nobody ever wrote down. In the first week of May, about 2 weeks before he sets out his main vegetable transplants, Daniel sows a ring of sweet alyssum seed right around the edges of his garden, and he tucks dill and calendula starts in at the ends of every bed. He calls it his border. It's not for looks. He plants it first on purpose before the vegetables are even in the ground, because those flowers feed the predators, the lacewings, the ladybugs, the hoverflies, the tiny parasitic wasps, and Daniel wants that food source up and blooming early so the good bugs arrive and start breeding before the aphids and the squash bugs ever hit their stride. Think about what that means. By the time the first pest shows up looking for dinner, there's already an army waiting for it. The predators got there first. That's Daniel's rule again. Never let a pest find its dinner where it expects it. By May, the welcome mat for the beneficials is already down. Now compare that to how most of us were taught. Most American gardeners plant their flowers as an afterthought sometime in June. Once the vegetables are already struggling and the aphids are already winning, they're always a step behind. Daniel's a step ahead before the season even starts. And I missed that for 30 years because I was watching for pests instead of preparing for them. You won't find that bit of sequencing in any spray schedule bulletin. You can't package it. You can't sell it. It's the kind of thing you only learn by watching a man who's done it for 50 years. Daniel learned it the same way I did, by walking his garden every single morning with a cup of coffee, 10 quiet minutes, just looking. He told me once, "You can't tend what you don't see, Bill. The timing lives in the watching." Before I let you go, I want to come back to those good bugs for a second, because feeding and keeping that predator army across the whole season is its own piece of the puzzle. That's exactly what Chapter 6 of my book is about. Beneficial insects, your garden's army. It walks you through attracting and holding on to the ladybugs, the lacewings, the hoverflies, and the parasitic wasps, and how to build a proper insectary strip so they stick around all summer. Now you've got the defense the industry quietly stopped advertising it. This is the complete version, a system you install once and maintain easy, not another one-off tip. It's the 30-day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol, $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. If you're on your phone or laptop, the link's right down in the description. Take your time finding that phone. No rush, I'll be right here. So that's the whole thing. The Amish defend their gardens with a couple dollars of seed in the right timing, not a shelf of chemicals. And now you know the cheap, durable method that got buried under spray schedules after the 1950s, the one most American gardeners were quietly talked out of. Daniel's been doing it for 50 years. His father did it before him, and on a few hundred Amish farms across Lancaster County right now, this is just how spring looks. Try the insectary border on a single bed this season. Sow the alyssum, set out the dill, get the flowers up first. Then drop me a note in the comments and tell me what showed up. Next time I'll show you another one they were talked out of. Why Daniel has never once owned a rototiller and what his soil does because of it. I'll see you in the next one.